Historical perspectives on speaking in tongues. Evidence of the Holy Spirit's ever-presence within the church. While it is widely believed that speaking in tongues began with the birth of modern Pentecostalism in the early 20th century, there are earlier references to the practice between the biblical period and the events of 1901, the year many consider the beginning of the modern Pentecostal movement. Although the Pentecostal and Charismatic movements in the 20th century brought renewed attention to speaking in tongues, the practice has historical precedents in both Christian and non-Christian traditions. This ongoing presence of tongues through history serves as evidence of the Holy Spirit's continuous activity within the church, fulfilling Jesus' promise. I will be with you always, Matthew 28, verse 20. From the time of the apostles to the present, the Holy Spirit's enduring presence has continued to guide and empower the faithful, often through the miraculous gift of speaking in tongues. 1. Early Christian Church, 1st to 4th century. The Apostolic period. The most significant biblical reference to speaking in tongues comes from the New Testament, particularly in the book of Acts. At Pentecost, the apostles experienced speaking in tongues, an event often regarded as the first instance of glossolalia. Acts 2 verses 1 to 13. Imagine the apostles' astonishment as they spoke in languages they had never learned, miraculously communicating the gospel to people from all corners of the Roman world. This moment was a clear sign of the Holy Spirit's empowering presence. Jesus had promised his followers that they would receive power when the Holy Spirit came upon them. And Pentecost marked the fulfillment of that promise in a dramatic and unforgettable way. Early Church Fathers. Although references to speaking in tongues became less frequent after the Apostolic period, several early Church Fathers mentioned the practice in their writings. This highlights that the Holy Spirit's presence through these gifts was acknowledged and revered. O. Irenaeus, c. 130 to 202 AD in his work against heresies. Irenaeus affirms that in the Church, tongues, prophecies, and healings continue. He describes the Holy Spirit's gifts as ongoing, echoing the miraculous experiences of the early church. O. Tertullian, c. 160 to 225 AD. Tertullian, in his On Baptism, talks about the continuing gifts of the Holy Spirit, including speaking in tongues. For him, this was a powerful sign of the church's divine authority and spiritual life. O. Origen, c. 185 to 253 AD. Origen, while cautious about the widespread practice of tongues, nevertheless mentions the continuing presence of these spiritual gifts in the life of the church, demonstrating the enduring reality of the Holy Spirit's work. Imagine being in the early church, sitting in a gathering of believers as they spoke in languages you knew not to be their own, yet the message was understood clearly and profoundly. You might have been a part of that moment, suddenly realizing that the Holy Spirit was not just a distant promise but a present reality, intimately involved in the life of the church. 2. Middle Ages, 5th to 15th century. Monastic movements and mysticism. During the Middle Ages, reports of speaking in tongues or ecstatic speech were sporadic, but still appeared among certain Christian mystics and monastic movements. The hesychasts in the Eastern Orthodox Church, for example, engaged in deep contemplative prayer, which sometimes led to unusual speech or ecstatic utterances. In these moments, the faithful would experience a direct encounter with God, and often this led to expressions of spiritual awe that appeared similar to the biblical phenomenon of speaking in tongues. For those who participated in such mystical practices, it was clear that they were connecting with a divine presence that was still alive and active in the world. Imagine a monk deep in prayer, his voice rising in a language he had never learned, as he sought the divine in silence. To him, this was not just an emotional outburst, but a direct and living experience of God's Spirit moving within him. Cathar and other medieval movements. In the 12th and 13th centuries, the Cathar movement and other heretical groups practiced ecstatic worship, which may have included forms of glossolalia. These groups were often persecuted by the Catholic Church, but their ecstatic experiences reflected a desire to maintain a connection with the Holy Spirit through spiritual fervor. For them, speaking in tongues was a sign of spiritual purity and divine empowerment, a way of connecting with the unseen world in a deeper, more profound way. 3. The Reformation and post-Reformation period, 16th to 18th century. Anabaptists and radical reformers. 16th century during the Reformation, radical reformers like the Anabaptists exhibited fervent spiritual experiences, including ecstatic speech or tongues-like utterances. These expressions were part of their worship, though mainstream Protestant reformers largely rejected them. For the Anabaptists, however, speaking in tongues represented a spiritual awakening that was a direct result of their inner conviction and personal relationship with the Holy Spirit. Their emphasis was on a pure, unmediated connection to God, and speaking in tongues was seen as a sign of that direct communion. Imagine being part of a small Anabaptist community, where the worship was simple but deeply spiritual. You might have felt the overwhelming presence of God during a service. And then, in a moment of profound inspiration, you began to speak in a language that seemed foreign to your understanding, but filled with divine meaning. Quakers, 17th century, the Quaker movement, founded by George Fox in the mid-1600s, encouraged spontaneous spiritual expression and direct personal experience with God. The practice of speaking in tongues during Quaker meetings was one of the signs of the Holy Spirit's movement in the lives of believers. In these meetings, silence and stillness were key, but at times, the Holy Spirit would move powerfully, and a Quaker might speak in tongues, expressing the divine presence that filled the space. For those who participated in Quaker meetings, speaking in tongues was often a humble, spontaneous act that brought them into closer communion with God. It was less about structure and more about yielding to the Holy Spirit's guidance in the moment. Revival movements. 18th century, during the Great Awakenings in both America and England, there were many reports of people speaking in tongues during revival meetings. This period witnessed an outpouring of the Holy Spirit in many places, as people felt convicted by their sins and experienced powerful, ecstatic spiritual moments. Tongue speaking was often seen as a sign of the Holy Spirit's active presence among believers, confirming the authenticity of the revival and its transformative power. For the 19th century, precursor movements to modern Pentecostalism, Methodist and holiness movements, 19th century and the 19th century, particularly within the holiness movement, which sought to restore the gifts of the Holy Spirit, reports of tongue speaking began to emerge. These movements, often associated with the Wesleyan tradition, emphasized personal holiness and sanctification. Members of these groups believed that after experiencing sanctification, they would receive the baptism of the Holy Spirit, often accompanied by speaking in tongues. For those within the holiness movement, speaking in tongues was seen as a direct manifestation of God's Spirit and a mark of spiritual maturity. The idea that the Holy Spirit was still moving powerfully in the church, and that these gifts were still available, became an important part of their faith. The revivalist and evangelical movements. By the mid-19th century, the doctrine of continuing spiritual gifts, including tongues, resurfaced in various revivalist and evangelical groups. Though glossolalia was still largely confined to fringe or non-mainstream Christian groups, the idea of the Holy Spirit's active presence remains central to the faith of many believers. 5. 1901 and the birth of modern Pentecostalism. The most significant modern revival of speaking in tongues occurred in 1901, when Agnes Osmond at Bethel Bible School in Topeka, Kansas, became one of the first to speak in tongues as part of a Pentecostal revival. This event marked the official birth of the modern Pentecostal movement, which would spread rapidly in the decades that followed, with the Azusa Street revival of 1906 in Los Angeles being a pivotal moment in the movement's history. The Pentecostal and Charismatic movements of the 20th century highlighted tongue speaking as a sign of being baptized with the Holy Spirit, affirming the Holy Spirit's continuous presence and active role in the church as promised by Jesus. For those who experienced the 1901 revival, it was a deeply personal moment of spiritual renewal. Speaking in tongues was not merely a theological concept, but a deeply felt experience of God's presence that moved believers in ways that words alone could not express. The Holy Spirit was again made manifest in a powerful and unmistakable way. Conclusion: the practice of speaking in tongues is not just a characteristic of the modern Pentecostal movement. It is a sign of the Holy Spirit's enduring presence throughout Christian history. From the early church through the medieval period, the Reformation, and up to the 19th century, tongues have served as a powerful indicator of the Holy Spirit's work in the life of the church. As believers today continue to experience the gift of tongues, they are not simply engaging in a new phenomenon, but participating in a long and rich tradition that stretches back to the very birth of the church. Through all the ages, the Holy Spirit has remained true to Jesus' promise. I will be with you always, Matthew 28, verse 20, and speaking in tongues serves as a reminder of that constant and powerful presence. References. Here are some references related to the historical perspectives on speaking in tongues. Biblical references. 1. Acts 2 verses 1 to 13. The event of Pentecost where the apostles and disciples are filled with the Holy Spirit and begin to speak in tongues. 2. 1 Corinthians 12 verses 10 to 30. The apostle Paul discusses spiritual gifts, including speaking in tongues, and their place in the church. 3. Mark 16 verse 17. Jesus mentions that signs, including speaking in tongues, will follow those who believe. Early Christian writings. 1. Irenaeus, Against Heresies c. 180 AD. Irenaeus refers to the continuing presence of the spiritual gifts in the church, including tongues. 2. Tertullian, On Baptism, c. 200 AD. Tertullian discusses the spiritual gifts, including speaking in tongues, within the early church. 3. Origen, Commentary on Matthew, c. 250 AD. Origen briefly references the ongoing presence of the Holy Spirit's gifts, including tongues. Middle Ages. 1. Saint Francis of Assisi. While not directly recorded in text, Saint Francis' mystical experiences and reports of ecstatic speech can be connected to the broader history of Christian mysticism, where similar experiences are noted. 2. Hesychasm. The hesychastic prayer tradition in the Eastern Orthodox Church emphasized the experience of divine presence and mystical speech, though not necessarily glossolalia. It still points to the ongoing connection with the Holy Spirit. Reformationera. 1. Anabaptists. Various writings from the Radical Reformation, including the Martyr's Mirror, circa 1660, describe experiences of spiritual fervor, some of which are believed to involve speaking in tongues. 2. Tertullian, Against Praxeas c. 200 AD. References to the Holy Spirit as a living, active force in the church, tying back to early descriptions of tongues and spiritual gifts. Revival movements. 1. Charles Finney, Lectures on Revivals of Religion, 1835. Finney discusses spiritual revival and the miraculous gifts associated with it, including speaking in tongues. 2. William Seymour, Azusa Street Revival, 1906. Seymour's accounts and the historical documentation of the Azusa Street Revival detail the Pentecostal outpouring of the Holy Spirit, including speaking in tongues. Modern Pentecostal movement. 1. Agnes Osmond, Bethel Bible School, 1901. Osmond's experience is often regarded as the beginning of the modern Pentecostal movement, with reports that she was one of the first to speak in tongues during a prayer service at Bethel Bible School in Topeka, Kansas. 2. Frank Bartleman, Azusa Street. How Pentecost Came to Los Angeles, 1925. This book documents the events of the Azusa Street Revival, a key moment in the birth of modern Pentecostalism, with particular attention to speaking in tongues. Additional scholarly works. 1. David G. Peterson, The Acts of the Apostles, Pillar New Testament Commentary, 2009. A scholarly commentary on the book of Acts, detailing the significance of Pentecost and speaking in tongues in the early church. 2. Stanley M. Burgess, The Holy Spirit, A Pentecostal Interpretation, 1984. A detailed study of the role of the Holy Spirit in Pentecostal thought, including historical context of speaking in tongues. 3. Gordon D. Fee, God's Empowering Presence, The Holy Spirit in the Letters of Paul, 1994. A comprehensive exploration of the Holy Spirit in Pauline theology, with references to tongues as a sign of the Spirit's work. These references offer foundational texts, both biblical and historical, that document and discuss the continuing presence of speaking in tongues through church history. They provide valuable insights into how the Holy Spirit's work, particularly through this gift, has been recognized and understood in different periods of church life. Polly Speaks for You incorporates voice control features that allow users to perform essential actions like opening, saving, and creating new documents, as well as interacting with font and document editing dialogues. This is particularly helpful for individuals with disabilities, enabling hands-free operation and more accessible content management. Below are some of the voice control functionalities designed for ease of use. 1. Voice-commanded document handling. A open document. Users can say commands like open document, followed by the file name or location, and Polly will open the document for them. Save document. Commands like save document as or save allow the user to save their work without needing to manually click on buttons. Polly can also handle saving with specific file names or locations as dictated. A new document. A simple voice command such as create new document or start new file will initiate a fresh document in the app. A closed document. Commands like close document or exit can be used to close the current document. 2. Font dialog voice controls. Font style. Users can control font settings by saying change font to Arial or set font at Times New Roman. This would change the selected text's font style. A font size. Commands like increase font size or decrease font size adjust the text size according to user preferences. A font color. Users can use commands such as set font color to red or change font to blue to personalize the text color. 3. Voice-commanded document editing. A text formatting. Commands like bold text, italicized text, underline text, or strikeout text allow users to edit their document easily. For example, saying bold this text will apply bold formatting to the selected text. Alignment. Users can command alignment changes by saying align left, align center, or align right. A text insertion. A user can say insert text, and the software will insert the given text at the current cursor position. A text navigation. Commands such as go to the top, scroll down, or move to the next paragraph enable users to navigate the document without the need for a mouse or keyboard. 4. Voice-activated help and assistance. Help commands. Users can ask questions like, what can I do? Or help me with saving to receive guidance on specific tasks. Polly can offer step-by-step instructions based on voice queries. A undo/redo. Voice commands such as undo or redo let users correct mistakes or revert to previous actions in their document. 5. Advanced features for accessibility. Speech recognition training. For improved accuracy, Polly can guide users through the Windows speech recognition training process, adapting to their voice patterns and improving dictation accuracy. A text-to-speech for editing. Users can have text read aloud to them while editing, making it easier to spot errors and refine their documents. These voice-controlled features make Polly Speaks for You an accessible tool for individuals with disabilities, particularly those with visual impairments, mobility issues, or other conditions that limit their ability to use traditional input devices. The hands-free operation helps users maintain independence and improve their document management and editing experience. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons to stay updated with more content. The creator of Polly Speaks for You has always been driven by a passion for giving a voice to those who need it most. Whether it's through text-to-speech technology or voice recognition, the goal has always been to create tools that help individuals, especially those with disabilities or learning challenges, communicate and interact with the world in a way that is meaningful and empowering. The stories shared, such as those about the sailors aboard the HMS Victory, are not just about reliving history, they are about the power of voice. Through Polly Speaks for You, the creator saw an opportunity to use storytelling as a medium to convey courage, strength, and resilience, much like the sailors of the past. These stories are intended to inspire and engage users, reminding them of the importance of their voices, both literally and metaphorically. The idea behind these stories is to showcase how technology, particularly speech technology, can be a tool for preserving history, while also empowering users with the capability to share their own narratives. By blending history with technology, the creator of Polly Speaks for You aims to demonstrate how powerful a voice can be in shaping and sharing our world, past and present. In a sense, these stories represent more than just entertainment. They are a way for the creator to give a voice to history, to connect with users in a deeply human way, and to remind them that their voices matter, whether they are telling their own stories or those of others. The creator's work in developing Poly Speaks for You is never just about making a functional tool. It was about making sure that every voice had the power to be heard. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons to stay updated with more content. This content has been adapted from the powerful features of Poly Speaks for You, South Africa's leading accessibility software. Learn more at www.polyspeaksforyou.co.za. We invite you to support this meaningful dyslexic initiative, crafted and developed by an individual who personally understands the challenges of dyslexia.